There's now a way to contact the Wolf Connection podcast. Send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Calfa. Let's talk about some wolves. Very important guest here on the podcast to discuss his guest essay, which has really gained some traction, that was published in the New York Times. He has been an author since a young man, a young boy in kindergarten. He has published roughly 8 books, and 2 of those being The Return of the Wolf to Yellowstone and The Killing of Wolf Number 10. Both of those excellent reads. He is a Peabody and an Emmy Award winner as well, and he's coming to us from Livingston, Montana. Tom McNamee. Tom, pleasure to have you here with Stephen and I. How are you doing, sir?
Excellent. Thank you.
Of course. Absolutely. So just please go through, because we're in the comment period for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, to look at the discussion of relisting gray wolves. And your guest essay has really gained traction in the wolf community. People are using it in social media to tweet or at Secretary Deb Haaland and also the White House. And just tell everyone the background of what's going on, a refresher of what's happening in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and the feedback you're getting for your essay.
Okay. Wolf hunting had been underway for quite a while in the 3 states of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming on a limited basis. We didn't like it much because it was interrupting the information lineage by which know-how and geographic knowledge and so forth are passed down from father and mother to son and daughter in wolf packs, which of course are families. But as of last spring, the legislatures of these 3 states went just bananas and opened up not just wolf hunting, but really just a wolf slaughter. Hard to say exactly why they decided to do that. The state of Idaho, for example, has decided that they want to kill 90% of their gray wolves. And the methods being used are not just the usual rifles and traps, but you're allowed to mow down wolves with snowmobiles and all-terrain vehicles or your pickup truck. You can use bait. You can use wire snares. You can use night vision scopes. And you can, in Montana, for example, if on private land, you can kill 20 wolves at a go. And this is going on right now. Hundreds of wolves have been killed all through the fall and up to now in the winter. And what the legislators have said, the purported reason for this is to protect livestock and wildlife, the animals that are hunted, primarily elk out here. And in fact, wolves have been really meaningless in terms of their effect on elk. They do kill elk, but there are so many elk out here, it doesn't matter. In fact, there are so many elk that ranchers have been requesting to the states that the elk seasons be extended, because there's so many elk, and elk eat grass, and therefore they compete with cattle. And they also raid haystacks. And cattle generally in the winter here are fed on hay. And then as for the cattle themselves, the great claim is that they're protecting cattle from wolf predation. Wolf predation on cattle in this region is insignificant. It's maybe 1 in 10,000 cows. Though what real ranchers really worry about are things like a cow falls in the ditch and drowns, or market conditions. The beef market is controlled by 4 basically monopolies, international corporations that completely control the price of beef. And those are the worries that ranchers have, not wolves. Most ranchers don't care. I myself was a partner in a cow ranch. We didn't worry about wolves. We worried about the regular things that other ranchers worry about. These men, and they are almost entirely men, in the legislatures love to dress up like cowboys. They're like make-believe cowboys. They've got the hats, they've got the boots, they've got the big belt buckles, they've got the shirts with the little snaps down the front. And, it's a sort of great macho thing to, swagger along the halls of Helena and pretend to be a tough guy rancher and pretend to be defending the interests of ranchers. And it's just baloney. It's just killing. It reminds me of the slaughter of black people we saw under Jim Crow when hundreds of American black people were being killed in the South. Not because they posed any threat to white people, but just because they wanted to kill them. They just hated them. And that's what's going on now with wolves.
Yeah, I've heard some of these things mentioned before as well, that, wolves are making an impact on elk, but not significantly enough to really be this incredible talking point. And I mean, even though, like you said, wolves kill about 0.01% of cattle, it just seems to be that it's, I don't know, like you said, there are 5 to 10 different ways cows die in numbers. I mean, I live on a ranch as well, and there's plenty of things plague a herd before predators. So it's not on the high end of the spectrum in the context of cattle loss in comparison to other things, and some of which are related to the naturally occurring conditions of cattle farming in general. So why does this fuel the argument so intensely?
It's entirely symbolism. And, people from elsewhere look at this region and they see cattle on the ground, of course. And I think, well, that's the economy here. Well, it's not. Actually, the main driver of the economy in this region is tourism. People come here to see wildlife. They come to see bison. They come to see bears. They come to see wolves. And in fact, the most popular wolf pack in Yellowstone Park for tourists, because it lived in a place that's open grassland, and they became very unshy about being seen. It's called the Salmon Lake Pack, very popular with visitors from all over the world. And because they were used to being seen by people, they lost their fear of people. Well, hunters managed to lure them across the Yellowstone Park boundary, which of course is invisible to a wolf, and they've all been killed. The whole pack is dead. Because, they don't know the sound of a rifle cocking. They see hunters, they just think, more tourists. Who are they? Bang. And then, of course, to encourage this mania, our governor of Montana, Greg Gianforte, went out as soon as these new so-called rules went into effect. He has a billionaire donor who has a ranch adjacent to Yellowstone Park. He went out on this ranch and caught a wolf in a wire snare, shot it through the head, cut the head off, sliced off the hide, and took home his trophies. And, Mr. Macho, great pride in with a certain segment of the Montana population. This raises him in their respect. And to the rest of us, it's just sickening.
Right. I wonder, Tom, where is the disconnect between what seems as though it seems as at least at minimum it seems 50-50 split between the way people view wolves in Montana from at least everything that we've spoken to on this podcast and everything we've read. So where's the disconnect for the legislative body to go so far in one direction and not listen to the views of what it seems like is the majority of what you're saying are ranching issues, as opposed to putting, like you said, this symbolism act at the top, and it seems like having the vocal minority take control of this management, or what really isn't management of this species.
Well, it's a kind of mass insanity. I think it's the madness of crowds. People get together in a group and they start to egg one another on. It's a little bit like January 6th. These large number of people who continue to believe that Trump actually won the election. Everybody who actually knows anything knows the facts. Everybody knows he didn't. but there are still a lot of people who think he did. There are still a lot of people who think wolves are a danger to cattle and that they're killing off the elk herds. And the fact of the matter is that there are more elk than ever. And once people start to believe these false things, it's very hard to convince them. In fact, there have been psychological studies that show that when people have a false belief and you show them the facts disproving the false belief, they tend to cling all the harder to the false belief. This is apparently human nature. God help us.
Yeah. I just want to, I mean, if we can get into Colorado a little bit even, because this has me thinking, but let's just say I'm someone who says, well, wolves haven't been in these states in centuries, yet maybe we were too heavy-handed in the 1900s and shouldn't have taken it that far. But now that they've been gone for so long and everything seems to be fine, why release wolves? What are the upsides to doing this? Why should we bother in Colorado, being that that's our next stage of events, really?
I think there are a number of reasons. The primary one reason why we brought them back to Yellowstone and Central Idaho was that these ecosystems they were wild ecosystems that were essentially intact. I was on the board for years of the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. And what we at the coalition always used to say is that the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which comprises not just the park, Yellowstone Park, the world's first national park, the United States' biggest national park outside of Alaska, but also Grand Teton, 7 national forests, 2 Indian reservations, private lands, state lands, and so forth, the size of Switzerland, big place. We used to call it the biggest essentially intact wild ecosystem in the temperate zones of the earth. Well, essentially intact, yes, but the key word was essentially because it was missing its apex predator, the wolf. And a wild ecosystem, an intact ecosystem can't really be intact without its apex predator. They stabilize ecosystems. They make things whole. And this is true throughout nature. Whether it's a coral reef or a colony of insects underground, apex predators are essential to the functioning of whole ecosystems. And so, you can look at Colorado and say superficially, everything is okay. And well, yeah, sort of, maybe, but it's better with wolves. No question.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at what you were saying before, when you spoke on the tourism aspect, when I spoke to you prior to us having this podcast, I believe that same day you got on the front page of your newspaper, I think it was the Billington Gazette Billings Gazette, that there is actually a business coalition that has formed opposing these extreme hunting, trapping measures. And so what kind of effect is that having locally, that there are businesses that are now coming together and saying, this is too far, swinging too far the other way? Is that being heard? Do you speak to anyone who runs a business there that is seeing these things and opposing it?
Well, yeah, I know a lot of those people. There are, businesses that take people down the Yellowstone River fishing, and there are people who take hikers out and people who take tourists out on horseback rides, backcountry camping trips. There are simply motel owners, restaurant owners. The whole world around here thrives on tourism. There were 4 million people who came through Yellowstone Park last year. And all of them, even the hunters, the elk hunters. The elk hunters aren't opposed to wolves. I'm sure a few are, but mostly they understand that wolves are part of the system also. It's crazy people who are against it. And so, in fact, there has been an effect from this uprising of local businesses and local people in general, which is that tomorrow, the Montana Wildlife Commission is having an emergency meeting to reconsider the wolf hunting rules in what's called Region 3, which is where I am right now, around the southwestern Montana, which incorporates all the land around Yellowstone Park. So we don't know what they're going to do, but they wouldn't be having this meeting if things weren't coming to a boil.
Yeah, I think sometimes in small towns, especially, it's easy to think that, there are certain times of year, when you live in a place and there's a lot of tourists and you can't get into a restaurant or you can't get into your local place or you can't get into places you generally go to. And I totally understand that sometimes can get under your skin. But I think that the assumption is that small towns like this would still be receiving the resources they're receiving or be building the infrastructure they're building. Potentially these towns wouldn't even exist anymore. People wouldn't be able to sustain them or to work in them were it not for tourism. I mean, what would the towns outside of Yellowstone look like if people didn't come and visit them anymore in 2022?
That's right. As you say, many of them, they would just wither and die.
Right.
They wouldn't be here.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad, but I think it's the truth,
I don't think it's sad at all. I think we're sort of proud of having people come here. I mean, for a living, the street next to my street here in Livingston is called Yellowstone Street. The main drag through town is called Park Street. The river that I'm living 6 blocks from is the Yellowstone River. It's all about Yellowstone here. And everybody's, I think a lot of people who live here because of that.
Absolutely. I just mean that this feeling that folks have that they don't want to have to rely on outsiders to keep this small town alive, that they have this romantic, memory of, I'm sure, even some of them from when they were kids. But in the reality, like we depend on each other, and especially in these small towns, if we want to see them maintained and we want to see them looking pristine and having people even able to live there, then we rely on visitors coming and having a beautiful experience. And I guess that doesn't really translate.
Well, actually, Yellowstone Park was largely created by the lobbying of the railroads who wanted to bring tourists.
So people
out
coming
here.
anyway. Yeah.
And so, it's from the beginning. Tourism has been the driver of this regional economy from the very beginning, 1863 or whatever it was when the park was founded, 1861. Yeah. And it's funny, there's a restaurant here that used to be the old railroad station where they're trying to restore passenger rail now. It's a beautiful place, and they have still the old posters that were put up by the Union Pacific Railroad promoting tourism to Yellowstone. And there they were. They were right there from the very beginning. And they made a lot of crooked real estate deals. In fact, they still own a lot of land here where they made these trade-offs with Congress. Well, we're going to build a hotel for you as long as you give us X many acres up in the mountains where we can go and log and then take the wood out on our trains.
Yeah, it's a similar story for most small towns.
So they bring people in, wood out.
So when we're talking about this, and we know, you've been living there for quite some time, when it seems as though, we have this dynamic now where the legislative bodies seem to not listen to the public and what their needs are and what's driving local economies and what's driving these towns and these cities to be robust and to live. So when you see these things, and we talked about this too prior, is where is the higher up action, the governors, the senators of Montana, realizing that this is a serious issue, and it's not correlating on the federal level, and they're not speaking to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. The White House hasn't seemed to be getting involved. It's been very, very quiet, because when I saw your essay and then I saw it being retweeted multiple times, people are clearly gravitating towards your words, your work, and saying, why aren't you looking at this issue? This is a serious issue. Because every time I see the Fish and Wildlife or Secretary Holland, tweeting something out about, oh, these beautiful things that we're doing, basically 99% of the comments are about gray wolves and also about wild mustangs, because that's also another issue that's happening as well in the West. So where is the disconnect on the higher level let alone Gianforte, the top, the head honchos there in the state.
No, it really boils down to the larger culture war that's underway, and it's not getting any better because the haters are louder, and they do very, very well in terms of in stirring people up here. I mean, Gianforte won the governorship here largely by displaying himself as a sadist. When he had just been elected to Congress, he was a congressman before he was a governor here. He was questioned by a reporter for The Guardian, the English newspaper, and Gianforte didn't like the question, and so he chest bumped him and so hard he knocked him to the floor, and then jumped on him and started beating the hell out of him, and he was arrested. The cops got him and they took him to the station. Gianforte refused to be fingerprinted. He tried not to have his picture made by the cops, and he was convicted of assault. Trump immediately praised him. This is his kind of thing, right? He loves to have, politicians who have the guts to beat up a reporter. Boy, that's great. And of course, it was great for Gianforte. By the time he was running for governor of Montana, hey, here's a guy who beats up the media physically. And this kind of thing goes a long way out here with the people who, I try to figure this out sometimes. Hatred is exciting. It makes the cortisol level rise in the bloodstream, and it excites people. And peaceful bliss doesn't. And love is a sketchier, slipperier thing to put your finger on. And, so loving wolves is not as powerful a motivator as hating them. And that's proved to be the case here in politics. I mean, it's the people who hate wolves are fewer, but they're more powerful simply because hatred is more powerful, I think. And there are a lot of these people, and it ties into the radical right very readily. And they're often, they wear clothes and drive trucks and other things that are very readily identifiable. They have their visible badges of your tribal identity. They don't wear Patagonia jackets. They wear Carhartt, and they drive certain kinds of trucks that are all jacked up high and have huge knobbly tires and noisy mufflers. And it's very tribal, and I don't know really why this is and why. It is self-perpetuating. There's a tribal thing of we're the downtrodden, and the coastal elites are invading us. And we're driving up the real estate prices. We don't have college educations like these suckers. And so, I think the wolf is, the wolf lovers probably are more likely to be college educated and wear Patagonia jackets, They have their tribal identities too.
So based on your experience in Montana, I've heard this argument a lot from folks who don't want to see wolves, is that, well, majority of people voting for wolf reintroduction are living in the cities, and they're not going to have to experience the consequences of this, and maybe it feels this revenge that, it feels like revenge in some ways, right? This revenge that we're seeing feels like it might partly be in a response to that folks are voting for something that they're not going to really have to bear any of the consequences of. What would be an appropriate way to comment on that argument, or is there a way that we can tangibly compensate for that fact? Because I guess in some ways it is true.
Well, I think first of all, they should understand that the consequences of having wolves here are benign. They don't harm us. They don't harm the economy. They're a benefit to the economy. They're not dangerous. that when a wolf sees you, it runs away. Not like a grizzly bear. And people say, "Well, we're going to introduce wolves to Central Park." Well, that wouldn't work because there is no prey base in Central Park. But if you say, we're going to introduce wolves to eastern Long Island because the deer are all eating our gardens, which is true, that's not implausible. Because when I got started studying up on this, I got to be friends with a brilliant biologist in Rome named Luigi Boitani. And he has been studying the wolves of Italy for many years. And they were down to a very small number. And they lived just 40 miles east of Rome, a very small population in the Apennines. And from that base, small base, they multiplied, and they both north and south along the Italian peninsula and northward further into Austria, Germany, France, and Switzerland. And they've done very well. And those wolves live very, very close to people. And sometimes, they'll run into town and turn over garbage cans and eat spaghetti out of the alleys, but, because the prey base is not so good there. But of course, they're not dangerous there either. But the fact of the matter is that wolves can live among people. The limiting factor is bullets and traps and poison. So, they're not harmful. So, people say, well, what's the downside of having wolves in your neighborhood? There's not one.
Mm-hmm. What's the management plan that you would get behind in terms of wolves? The ideal management plan, is it where there's no lethal management, or where there's some lethal management in certain cases? What's the management plan that you would approve of if it were handed to you?
I think there's the occasional wolf who gets in its mind that killing sheep is a good idea. Wolf like that has to be taken out. Occasionally there are whole packs that start to behave like that, just like, gangs in the city will start to be criminals. And of course we don't execute whole gangs, but that's what you have to do with wolves. And I think that's about it. Otherwise, just leave them alone. Right.
Yeah. We heard from someone in Spain, actually, who said that sheep are much easier to protect if you have the right types of dogs. But
that's right.
I'm not sure I've seen the right types of dogs in North America. I think we generally go for collies and stuff, which are not
Well, yeah, but, I have a friend who has a very large ranch in Idaho that goes from the Snake River Plain up to the top of the, I can't remember the mountain range there. And they run sheep, and they protect them with dogs. And they also have herders, these Peruvian herders who ride horses. And they do things like they gather the sheep up at night, and they put them, temporary fence around the band of sheep, and they put flags, these sort of flags that flap in the wind on the wires that's encircling the sheep. And there are wolves right there. And they've had very, very little loss to wolf predation there. And it's partly a matter of sort of making a deal with the local wolves. If they understand that, the dogs are going to harass them, you're going to manage the sheep in such a way that they're going to be less available, and you're going to shoot a wolf if it misbehaves, then generally speaking, if time is allowed to pass and the wolves are allowed to establish their own territories, peace can be attained. And that's what they've done in most places in Italy, because there are a lot of sheep there. I have friends here, this is not a wolf story, it's a coyote story, who have both cattle and sheep on a ranch in Sweetgrass County. And they have coyote family lives right in the middle of the sheep. And they've basically achieved peace between the sheep and the coyotes. So people don't believe this, but it's true. Because they just said, okay, we're going to leave you alone, coyotes. It's long as you leave our sheep alone. And it's over time, because they've allowed the coyotes to establish a territory and pass information along from the old to the young, it's worked. And the coyotes don't kill the sheep, which is a miracle.
Yeah.
But they don't.
That is a miracle. What information is not being distributed? Because it seems you have multiple instances and friends of yours that are in the ranching community that I imagine they found ways to coexist with the predators on the landscape. So what information is not being translated from those success stories that you just said to I guess the vocal minority or the population at large to see that this is something that can be achieved in the long term?
Yeah. Why is it not better known? I don't know. It needs to be better known.
I mean, we did talk to, who was it, Karen Bardeman,
Yeah.
and Kurt, obviously. Kurt Holtzen.
Kurt
Those
Holtzen,
are, yeah, two folks working on pretty incredible mitigation tools. But is there a willingness? Like they're coming and they're coming, and we're going to be open to maybe some of these mitigation tools, or is it's a hard no? It's a
hard sell. In this area of Idaho that I'm talking about, there's been a cooperative group of ranchers who are all managing their stock in such a way that will allow wolves to live nearby. And they've slowly been working with other people. This is near Sun Valley, big resort town, a lot of money. And so there's a local population of maybe just summer and winter people. People come to ski, people come to spend time in their summer houses. And of course, money talks. And they've been easier to convince, of course, because they don't have sheep. But and so gradually they've been working with them, and for example, they're selling their lamb meat to local grocery stores and helping the grocers to understand, to sell for a reasonable price to the grocery stores, and then working with, say, for example, motel owners who are dealing with people from not there to help them understand that these ranches are thriving in the midst of wolves, and slowly letting information spread among people who are there, permanent residents of this valley, who don't have anything to do with wolves or sheep or ranching in general, but whose livelihoods depend on, let's say, tourism, and the tourists, trying to help the tourists understand that this is how things are working. And so they talk to the bankers and like I say, grocers, bankers, motel owners, and gradually, and they've had meetings, they've had these community meetings where they make their presentations and try to explain what they're doing. And I think incrementally the word is percolating through. These are Mormon communities, and Mormons seem to be less likely to be haters.
Yeah, it seems if it's on the local level, the information's able to percolate and spread, whereas if it's coming from government agencies or senators or individuals that hold sway or power, everyone's a little bit less likely to listen or think that they're fighting for their best interests. Is that something that you've seen just based on what you just told us?
I guess, when we were trying to get the reintroduction done, the guy who was basically in charge of it for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, a wonderful guy named Ed Banks, had to go to 10 billion community meetings and explain over and over and over and over that this was not going to be that big a deal. And sometimes he had to have local cops standing with him armed just to give his talks. And, he got a lot of shit as he went along. And, but, he also made a few friends and got a little bit done. And ultimately, I think he was very effective in keeping the politicians, the wolf-hating politicians at bay. I mean, for example, Senator Al Simpson of Wyoming was powerful. Al thought he owned Yellowstone, and he sort of did. And he stepped back. He could have stopped the wolf reintroduction. all by himself, probably. And he didn't really like it, but he was not a vocal opponent. And that made all the difference in the world. And other local politicians who could have been very noisy and harmful kept out of the way. Partly thanks to Ed and various other people who were very persuasive. And then in turn, when the politicians start to act like that, then people will start to follow them. And now we have a new crop of politicians who aren't like that, who thrive on the hatred.
We've heard of that from a few people, just needing to have security with them whenever they're out in the public mentioning wolves. I don't understand. What it would accomplish to hurt somebody like that to prevent a few cattle a year from being lost. I don't understand I'm confused about that. But we've heard about it from a dozen people just saying they needed, at some point in their career of promoting wolf reintroduction, they needed security. And that's just wild to me.
Oh, yeah. When I was trying to promote my little book, The Killing of Wolf Number 10, the guy who killed wolf number 10 lives, he got out of prison. He was sent to prison, thank God. And he was back in his hometown of Red Lodge, Montana. And he's back to his old tricks, which is drinking and showing off his guns all over the place. He'd go into bars with his guns. Nobody liked him because he was really scary because he, always tossing loaded guns around. And I went over there to give a reading in the bookstore in Red Lodge, and a woman came to me. I was doing one here in Livingston, and a woman came up to me and she said, "I'm from Red Lodge. And I heard I saw a poster that said you're going to give a reading over there." I said, yeah. She said, "Well, Chad McKittrick is back in there and he's running around drunk all the time, and you better watch your butt." And I said, "God, I didn't think about that." And she said, "Well, you better call that bookstore owner." So I did. And he said, "Yeah, I better talk to the sheriff." So I go over there. They're the two biggest cops I ever saw in my life with police, POLICE written across the front of their shirts. And they stood on either side of me with pistols while I gave this reading. And they said, "You better get out of town before sunset."
Tom, what do you think, if you're looking at it objectively in Montana, what's the way forward in your, since you've lived there, you wrote about it, you're living it. What do you see as the way forward? What's the way for us to get to a point that we don't have to have emergency meetings, we don't have crazy hunting rules and trapping rules and pushing the envelope one way or the other? Where can we find the middle ground, in your opinion?
I wish I had an easy answer. I think the first thing we have to do is put the wolves back on the threatened species list. But even that, on an emergency basis, I think it's only good for, 14 months or something like that. So that basically gives you a cooling off period, if you stop the Israelis and the Egyptians from shooting at each other. I think it was Kissinger who did that. I don't know. Thomas Edsall had a piece in yesterday's Times in which he had been consulting with all these different scholars that studied polarization in various countries and sort of where the tipping points came. And what were the characteristics of these countries with extreme polarization? And Edsall was concluding that we had passed the tipping point in this country. But I think that it has to be addressed at that level, a social level, not just about wolves as such, but we have to turn down the temperature in general and maybe have some less radical people running for office.
Yeah.
One thing I think is conceivable is that if the Republicans do badly in the next election across the board, and the party starts to split up, and there's a sort of Trump faction and a moderate faction, and the moderate faction starts to do well, and we once again have a moderate center-right party. And I was just trying to look at the Italian elections today. I listened to the Italian radio when I shaved in the morning. And in general, the developments in European politics seem to be that the radical right and the radical left are doing worse, and the centrist parties are doing better. And I just hope that maybe that we could start to come that way in this country, and that the craziness will start to wear off a little bit. I mean, apparently Trump's support is waning, although the craziness is not. I don't know. I would just hope that we start to have some people. I mean, right here in Park County, we have a very effective environmental organization called the Park County Environmental Council. And they're very calm and they're very reasonable. And they have run into trouble in a few places where they tried to get some moderate zoning done. Word zoning is poison around here. But for the most part, they've made a lot of friends. And they were instrumental in getting this group of businesses together to do a business person's petition on wolves. And that was really extraordinary. And it was a remarkable accomplishment. And if we can do more things like that, where common ground is found that isn't necessarily automatically politicized, where, for example, business people discover that it's to their advantage. And that, to the extent that those business people were signing that petition, that's taking serious support away from the radical right legislators in Helena. If that can continue to develop, that would be pretty good. And I also think something is going on here that will make a difference, which is that, I mean, in many ways, it's a negative, or people think of it as a negative here, which is the influx of people from outside this region. Bozeman is growing by leaps and bounds. People jokingly call it Bose Angeles, because a lot of people coming there from California, and they bring their politics with them.
It's always the joke, huh? Everything turning into Los Angeles.
Well, and the funny thing is that, of course, California has plenty of right-wingers, and they go to northwestern Montana, and the liberal Californians come to Bozeman. So this part of Montana is getting bluer, and that's likely to be of benefit to conservation. Because Democrats are more likely to vote for conservation. I wish it weren't the case. It didn't used to be. Back in the 50s, it was Nixon who signed the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act. And he created the Environmental Protection Agency. We tend to forget these things, that Nixon, who was such a horror in so many ways, was not a bad environmentalist.
Yeah. It's amazing how some of that happens. One more thing. I just have two more things for you, Tom, before we wrap. What do you think, or if you were to point people in the right direction as to how they can get their voices heard, for if they're local in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, what's a good way for them to have their voices heard? When are meetings coming up? And also federally, what's a good way? I know there have been posts on all sorts of social medias that are pointing people of how to contact Fish and Wildlife about this. If you were to point people in the right direction, where would you tell them to go?
Well, I just learned after the publication of my piece that one of the primary obstacles in this whole thing is our Democratic senator in Montana, John Tester. I didn't know that. I wish I'd known it before I published. He apparently is the big obstacle at this point. So anybody wants to write or to Tester, email him, call his office, whatever, that could make a big difference. He apparently is afraid he'll lose to a Republican, not this year, but in 2024. He's going to lose the conservative so-called vote in Montana. And that supposedly Tester's putting pressure on the White House about this, and the White House in turn is putting pressure on the Secretary of the Interior not to do something about wolves. It's just wild. This is a crazy story. As for pressuring Secretary Holland, certainly it needs to be done. But if you try to email her, you can't find her email address. I mean, every officer of the government has an email address, except her, seems. All you get, if you try to go there, is info@dli.gov. I'm sure if you write that, eventually say, please send this to Secretary Holland, it'll get there. But, I mean, she's the one with the finger on the lever to get the wolves relisted. I don't think writing to the local Republican representatives here is going to do any good at all, to tell you the truth, unless you just bombard them. Maybe it'll help. I don't know. But I think certainly supporting the organizations that are working on behalf of wolves is very valuable. Defenders of Wildlife is a very good one.
Yeah, I'm gonna have those. I'm gonna have the links in there for people to look at your article and the article about the Business Coalition that was formed, which was the Wild Livelihoods Business Coalition. So anybody who's listening that's in the western part of the United States and wants to see how that coalition's working, I'll have that there so you can take a look at it. My last question for you, Tom, before, I know, absolutely. I want everybody to have the right information and the factual information. So my last question for you, Tom, is when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
I see a pack of wolves howling in the snow.
Love it.
I love that. I love that. Nice and simple. Everyone, please, try and act whatever you feel is what you're called to do. Please go out if you can, get a chance to read Tom's book, all of his books, but not just the ones about wolves, but look for The Return of the Wolf to Yellowstone and The Killing of Wolf Number 10. Thomas McNamee, thank you so much for joining Stephen and I. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Both you guys.
You're great.
And your organization. I think what you guys are doing is really quite remarkable.
And to tack on to what John's saying there, try to take the action you're inspired to, but also every chance you get, we gotta just do better about creating common ground and having, productive conversations with each other, even when we disagree, because that even just on the ground floor, just around us is becoming almost nearly impossible. And I think that's something we have to retain a little bit if we're going to solve any of these complex issues or compromise even a little bit.
You're absolutely right.
No, Stephen, you always bring that point home, and I thank you for that. Yes, everyone, we got to meet in the middle. Everybody, we're all here. We're all trying to do the best for ourselves and for the species that are here. So please, let's try and hit the radical middle. That's the way we got to do it. So, house to everyone out there. And
absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. House to everyone out there. And Stephen, I'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the donate tab, and find out more information.